Deep in the Ozark Mountains, there's a place that doesn't appear on any official map. No signs point toward it, no locals willingly speak about it. And if you ask the wrong person, they'll simply tell you to forget you ever heard the name. But years ago, a group of hikers claimed they found it. It started as a normal trip. A quiet trail, dense forest, and miles of untouched land stretching in every direction. The kind of place where your phone loses signal, and the silence feels just a little too heavy. That's when they saw the cabin, hidden between twisted trees, barely visible under years of decay. It looked abandoned, forgotten, left to rot. But something about it felt wrong. The door was slightly open, and from inside came a sound. Not an animal, not the wind. Something else, something human. What they discovered inside that cabin would later be described as one of the most disturbing finds in the history of the Ozark Mountains. And the truth is, that was only the beginning. The Ozark Mountains stretch across vast areas of wilderness, covering parts of Missouri and Arkansas, known for their dense forests, steep ridges, and isolated valleys. It's the kind of place where entire communities can exist without ever being noticed by the outside world. For the group of hikers, it was supposed to be just another weekend escape. There were 4 of them, all experienced, all familiar with navigating remote terrain. They had planned their route carefully, choosing a lesser-known trail that cut deep into the forest, far from tourist paths. At first, everything felt normal. The air was crisp. The forest was alive with distant bird calls. Leaves crunched under their boots as sunlight filtered through the canopy above. But as they moved deeper, something began to change. The sound started to fade. No birds, no insects, just silence. One of them joked about it, said it felt like the forest was holding its breath. The others laughed it off. But the unease lingered. That's when they noticed something strange along the trail. Old markings carved into trees. Not symbols they recognized. Not trail markers. Just deep uneven cuts and almost like warnings. They debated turning back, but curiosity pushed them forward. Minutes later they saw it. Through the trees, partially hidden behind overgrowth, stood a small wooden cabin. At first glance it looked abandoned. The roof sagged slightly. The wood was darkened with age and moisture. Windows were either broken or boarded up from the inside. But there was one detail none of them could ignore. The front door was open. Not wide open, just enough. As if someone had left it that way, recently. And that's when the smell hit them. Faint, but unmistakable. Something rotten. Something that didn't belong in a place untouched for years. They should have turned back. They all knew it. But instead, they stepped closer. The closer they got to the cabin, the heavier the air seemed to feel. It wasn't just the smell anymore. It was something deeper. A pressure, like the forest itself was warning them to stop. One of them hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't go in," he said quietly. No one responded, because they were all thinking the same thing. But none of them wanted to be the first to turn back. The cabin stood unnaturally still. No movement, no sound. Just that half-open door, waiting. As they reached the wooden steps, they noticed something strange. The wood wasn't as decayed as it should have been. In fact, parts of it looked recently used. A faint footprint marked the dirt near the entrance. Not old, fresh. That's when the fear truly set in. This place wasn't abandoned. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. One of them slowly pushed the door open further. It creaked loudly, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. Inside it was almost completely dark. Only thin lines of light slipped through cracks in the walls, barely illuminating the interior. At first they couldn't see much, just shadows, shapes. Then their eyes adjusted, and that's when they realized the inside didn't match the outside. The cabin looked small from the exterior, but inside it felt larger, too large. The layout didn't make sense. The walls stretched farther than they should have. The ceiling felt higher. It was subtle, but wrong, very wrong. "Do you see this?" one of them whispered. Another nodded slowly. "This isn't right." They stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath their weight. Dust should have filled the air, but it didn't. Instead, the ground looked disturbed, as if something or someone had been moving through here recently. Then they saw the first object, a chair, placed in the center of the room, facing the door. Not broken, not rotting, just there, as if someone had been sitting, waiting. A cold chill ran through them. And then, a sound, soft, faint, from deeper inside the cabin. A dragging noise, followed by something that sounded like a whisper. They froze. Every instinct told them to run, but fear has a strange way of holding people in place. Slowly, carefully, they turned their heads toward the darkness behind the main room, toward a narrow hallway that shouldn't have existed, and whatever was making that sound was coming from there. The hallway stretched farther than the cabin's exterior should have allowed. A narrow corridor of shadows that seemed to swallow the dim light entirely. The hikers exchanged nervous glances. Every rational thought screamed at them to leave, but their curiosity, or perhaps something darker, kept them rooted in place. One of them, the bravest or the most reckless, stepped forward. The floorboards groaned under his weight, echoing like a warning through the hollow cabin. The dragging sound had stopped, replaced now by a faint, uneven tapping, like nails hitting the wooden floor at random intervals. The closer he moved, the stronger the smell became. A putrid mix of decay and something unmistakably human. The air was thick, almost solid, pressing down on them like the weight of the mountains themselves. Then at the end of the hallway they saw it. A door, partially ajar, the edges blackened with smoke or rot. Something inside stirred. A shadow moved across the cracked doorway, impossibly quick, vanishing before anyone could focus on it. "Did you see that?" whispered one of the hikers, voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a sudden low growl echoed from behind the door. Not an animal, not anything they had ever heard in the forest. Deep, guttural, and intelligent, it sent a shiver straight to their bones. One of them shined a flashlight into the dark room. The beam trembled as it cut through the darkness, revealing scattered objects across the floor, old furniture overturned, walls scratched with deep gouges, and what looked like a series of crude symbols carved into the wooden panels. Symbols they couldn't understand, symbols that felt alive. Then in the corner they saw the first sign of life. A figure, slumped, barely moving, its skin pale and stretched unnaturally, eyes hollow. But it wasn't dead. It was watching them. They froze. The cabin had been abandoned for years, they had assumed. Yet something, or someone, had survived inside. Or perhaps had never left. The dragging noise started again, closer this time. Behind them, the floorboards creaked under invisible weight. The walls seemed to shift, as if the cabin itself were breathing, contracting, alive with a presence that didn't want to be seen, but made sure it was felt. Every instinct screamed escape, but the hikers were trapped by the story unfolding before them. A secret that had been buried deep in the Ozark Mountains, waiting decades for someone to witness it. And now they had. The hikers couldn't move. Their hearts pounded in unison, each beat echoing in the oppressive silence of the cabin. The figure in the corner had not moved, yet its presence was undeniable. A living shadow that seemed to consume the room's air. One of them, shaking uncontrollably, whispered, "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave." But the moment he took a step back, a sudden metallic clang rang from deeper within the cabin. Something had fallen or been thrown. They froze again. The sound had come from a small room to the left, a door slightly hidden behind a broken wardrobe. The dragging noise was louder now, echoing as if the walls themselves were amplifying it. Against every instinct, one of them approached the hidden door. The smell was unbearable, a stench of decay mixed with something almost chemical. Pushing the door open, they found another room. This one was different. The walls were covered with photographs, faces of men, women, and children, all aged in different decades. But their eyes were scratched out. Marks carved into the wood, crude but deliberate. Some photos were torn. Some were burned along the edges. A notebook lay open on a small table, pages filled with strange writings, diagrams, and crude sketches, symbols that matched the carvings in the hallway. They realized with a sinking horror that these were not random acts. This cabin had been lived in, maintained, kept alive by someone or something. Suddenly a whispering filled the room. Not from outside, not from the figure in the corner, but all around them, as if the walls themselves were speaking. "Leave or join." The hikers' flashlights flickered. Shadows stretched impossibly long, moving against the light. The figure from the corner now stood, slowly, unnaturally, its movements jerky, almost puppet-like. One of the hikers tried to scream. Nothing came out. Another ran for the door, but the hallway seemed longer, twisted like a labyrinth. The cabin was no longer the small, isolated structure they had seen from outside. It had become something else. The dragging noise grew closer. From behind, a whisper repeated over and over, "You shouldn't have come here." Every instinct screamed terror, yet the hikers could not leave. Fear had paralyzed them, and curiosity, morbid, fatal curiosity, anchored them to the spot. And then, one of them realized something horrifying. The photographs on the wall were not old. Some faces looked familiar. Their own faces. Panic surged through the hikers as they stared at the photographs. Their faces, unmistakable. Every detail captured, the shape of their eyes, the lines on their hands, even the smallest scars. But that was impossible. They had never been here before. How could these photos exist? The room seemed to warp around them. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The walls groaned as if the cabin itself were alive, closing in on them. The dragging noise had grown louder, now accompanied by whispers in a language none of them could understand. Low, guttural, almost chanting. One of the hikers dropped the flashlight. It spun across the floor, casting chaotic beams of light against the walls. That was when they saw movement. From the darkness of the hallway, multiple figures emerged. Not fully human, not fully shadows. Thin, pale, with eyes glinting like shards of glass. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, like puppets controlled by unseen hands. A cold chill froze them in place. The figures didn't speak, but they circled the hikers slowly, deliberately, their presence pressing down like invisible hands. The bravest hiker tried to back away, only to feel the floor shift beneath him. The cabin's layout had changed again. Doors that led nowhere now opened into rooms they hadn't seen before. Hallways twisted, creating impossible angles. It was as if the cabin had grown around them, trapping them in a maze. Then, one of the pale figures pointed toward the wall covered in photographs. The whispers intensified. "You belong here." A horrifying realization struck them. This cabin was not abandoned. It had been waiting for them. For decades, its secret had remained hidden, drawing people closer, feeding off their fear, their curiosity. And now it had marked them. The dragging sound reached the ceiling. Something large, unseen, was moving above. The walls trembled, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. One of the hikers tried to speak. His voice shook. What do you want from us?" The whisper answered, "To remember, to continue, to never leave." Their minds struggled to comprehend. The cabin was alive, conscious and hungry, and it wasn't going to let them leave. Not while its secret remained hidden in the shadows of the Ozark Mountains. The hikers' hearts pounded like drums in a war chamber. Each step forward felt like wading through invisible molasses, the air thick with dread. The pale figures surrounded them now, their jerky movements synchronized, almost ritualistic. Whispers echoed in their ears, a chorus of warning and menace. "You cannot leave. You belong here." Suddenly, one of the hikers noticed something horrifying. The photographs on the walls weren't just of strangers. They depicted previous intruders, people who had disappeared in the Ozark Mountains over the past decades. Their faces twisted in fear, some mutilated, others with eyes wide in disbelief. Each photo seemed to capture the precise moment the cabin had claimed them. A cold realization settled over them. This place didn't just trap people, it transformed them. It claimed them, reshaped them, and added them to its dark history. And now it wanted them too. The dragging sound intensified. From the corner of the room, a low, guttural moan emerged. The floor beneath them quivered. One of the hikers screamed as a shadow stretched along the floor, reaching for their legs. It wasn't solid, but it was strong, pulling them toward the center of the cabin. Desperate, another hiker grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the ceiling. The beam revealed more figures, hanging from the rafters, pale and thin, watching silently. Their faces were familiar too, distorted versions of themselves. No, this isn't real," one whispered, but even as he spoke, his reflection appeared in a cracked mirror, twisted and pale, staring back with hollow eyes. The cabin seemed to breathe. Walls creaked and groaned, expanding and contracting unnaturally. The whispers became louder, almost screaming. "Stay! Stay! Stay!" The bravest hiker tried to open the door, only to find it sealed as if it had never existed. The hallway had vanished. The cabin had reshaped itself entirely, trapping them in a nightmare that was alive, aware, and malevolent. And then, the chilling truth struck them all. The cabin wasn't just a location in the Ozarks, it was an entity. A living ancient force that fed on fear, isolation, and curiosity. Every person who entered became part of its legacy, their essence trapped forever. As the shadows closed in, one thought dominated their minds. This was never meant to be found. And now, There is no escape. The hikers were paralyzed with terror. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the cabin had removed that option. The shadows pressed closer and the air grew colder, as if the walls themselves exhaled a freezing breath. Then, one of them noticed a small trapdoor in the floor, previously hidden beneath a threadbare rug. It hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had been invisible until now. Trembling, they pulled it open and found a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The dragging sound came from below, louder now, resonating through the cabin like the heartbeat of a monster. One by one, the hikers descended, compelled by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The staircase was steep, wooden planks groaning beneath their weight. The walls were slick with moisture, and faint scratching sounds echoed from unseen corners. At the bottom, they entered a subterranean chamber. Candles, long burned down to stubs, flickered along the walls, revealing strange symbols carved deep into the stone floor. Bones, human bones, were scattered across the chamber, some arranged in patterns that made no logical sense. In the center lay a journal, yellowed and cracked with age. Opening it revealed pages filled with handwriting from multiple authors over decades. The entries described the cabin's origins, a family, long ago, who had retreated deep into the Ozark wilderness, consumed by obsession and madness. They performed unspeakable rituals to preserve their existence and the cabin itself, binding it with fear, secrecy, and human essence. The final entries were frantic, almost illegible. They spoke of new arrivals, those who awakened the house, and eternal guardians. Each page ended with the same chilling phrase: "They will join us, whether they want to or not." A sudden gust extinguished the candles. Darkness swallowed them completely. The whispers escalated into anguished screams, echoing from the walls, the floor, even the shadows themselves. And then, one by one, the figures emerged from the darkness, pale, distorted, faceless. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets. The hikers realized in horror that these weren't spirits. They were the previous victims transformed, trapped forever to serve the cabin's insidious purpose. Panic turned to desperation. One tried to climb back up the staircase. The shadows lashed out, holding them down. Another screamed, but their voice was drowned in the chorus of whispers, moans, and dragging sounds. The cabin was alive. It was aware, and it wanted them. There would be no escape. The final moments felt like an eternity. The hikers were surrounded, trapped in the subterranean chamber by pale, twisted figures, victims of the cabin who now served it. Their jerky movements and hollow, glassy eyes reflected a fate worse than death. The whispers had become deafening, a cacophony of voices merging into one command: "Join us! Stay forever." One hiker, summoning every ounce of courage, lunged toward the staircase. The floor beneath him shifted violently, as if the cabin itself had grabbed him. He fell, narrowly escaping the snapping, shadow-like hands that reached out to pull him into the darkness. The others tried to follow, but each attempt was blocked by figures that weren't fully solid yet, weren't entirely illusions. Then came the realization they had all dreaded. The cabin's secret was not just its horror, it was its intelligence. It adapted. It manipulated the space, bending walls, hiding exits, and creating illusions to weaken the mind. Every panic, every thought of escape fed its power. One of the hikers saw it, the source of the cabin's malevolence. At the center of the room, a dark, pulsating shape lay on the stone floor. It was amorphous yet terrifyingly alive, writhing like a mass of shadows, tendrils snaking out in every direction. The whispers emanated from it. It fed on fear, curiosity, and despair. And now it had them. Desperation turned to sheer terror. They tried to fight, to push past the shadows, but the cabin's energy was overwhelming. The figures pressed closer, their eyes reflecting every memory, every fear, every regret. And as the pulsating darkness expanded, it engulfed them one by one. Their screams echoed, then faded, swallowed by the living structure. Hours later, or perhaps days, if anyone dared approach the cabin again, they would find it silent and abandoned from the outside. The forest around it untouched, as if nothing had happened. But inside, the legacy continued. New photographs would appear on the walls. New whispers would echo through the corridors. And the cabin would wait, hungry for the next intruders. The hikers were gone. Their faces, twisted in fear and disbelief, joined the countless others on the walls of the cabin. Their souls trapped as part of the Ozark Mountains' darkest secret. And the cabin waits, always waiting. Subscribe.